1 and 0. So what do you think? We've got 2/3 of the class is scoring below 50%. What are you going to do? Ideas? Yeah.
So my idea was to kind of start from the beginning with material-wise, but change your assessments and your homework based on where students are at, so that you're still challenging the students who might have scored higher than a 75 and helping students who are in the middle range and like trying to really make sure students in the bottom range are getting up to where those other two groups of students are.
So differentiating for the top end and then really focusing, yep. Other ideas? Anyone have a different idea of what to do?
I like your idea, and I would also incorporate it into my lesson plan. This is kind of my reality right now. And so like today we were trying to make a group of 10 when I realized my students couldn't count to 10. So I think I need to break it down to even more simpler steps, and that's how I would probably attack this. Is like still teach my objective and hold them to that high standard, but break it down even more, like every word of the objective.
Maybe think about, yeah, breaking the objectives down and doing key points differently than you might have otherwise. Yeah. What about reteaching everything you've taught so far? Did anyone talk about that? And have a reason why they would do that or not do that?
You could reteach, and small group, don't do a whole class now because you have too many failing, but do small groups, take your top 3, strategically place them in each group, and move yourself around to reteach, and then take those top 3 at some point, small group them together, and challenge them on their level.
Yeah, you could leverage those kids as a support for the others. And in the institute context, that's one thing that comes up a lot, right? Is like I taught my lesson today and then my exit slip shows that most of the kids didn't master it. Should I go back and teach that again? And in the institute context, we really do want to continue, because of our partnership with LAUSD, they're expecting us to teach a new objective every day. But as you head out to your school, there might be times when you're just like, you know what, just like start over. All right, let's do that objective again. So, did you have something?
Well, I was just going to say, if you do decide to reteach something, then change it up a bit. Like obviously something didn't get to the kids or stick to the kids the first time, so try to work with the skills that you kids have and reteach it in a different way.
Exactly. Like see what did they get and where can you go from there instead of doing exactly the same way. That's a good point. So thinking about data, there's just a couple like big picture mindsets that I think it's important to keep in mind. So the first one is that we do need to use data to make our instructional choices, right? Like sometimes things we really just like feel like something is good, like, oh, I feel like nobody could explain their thinking on my assessment that I just gave. In reality, we need to actually go into each assessment and see, is it really true that nobody can do it or everybody can do it, or is it like a subset of kids, right? So we want to be always really having evidence for our sense of how things are going. It's your responsibility as a teacher to adjust your instruction if you have evidence that they're not learning. And again, in the summer, that doesn't mean teaching the whole objective again, but thinking about how can you spiral that content back into what you're doing next. Unfortunately, the ISAT kind of builds, right? So there's usually several objectives in a row that are similar, so you have a good opportunity to do that. And then address missing knowledge and skills while still trying to stay on pace to meet the larger goal. So Ashley and I were talking about this morning, that in her class, she's noticing that these are entering 5th grade, right?
Yes.
That they don't know their multiplication facts. And that's not part of the ISAT. But in order to be successful, they are going to have to learn their multiplication facts. So we were talking about like what can they do in their classroom in 5 to 10 minutes a day to help kids learn the multiplication facts, but still be able to teach the daily math objectives. And if you want to talk about that later if you're in the same situation, we can all talk about it. Looking at numbers can seem really technical, and sometimes it seems like we're losing sight maybe of the fact that these numbers are attached to a student. So we always want to remember that we are talking about a student and their way of interacting with this test. And that's part of that student's story, right? But it's not the only thing. So we want to keep in mind other things that we know about that student, other evidence we have of their learning besides just the numbers on OSAT, right? Their actual work, as well as what they're saying and doing during our class periods, are things that can help us teach them as well. And then the last one is something that I feel really strongly about. I actually added it to the session I wasn't originally in here, which is that we can use data to empower or we can use it to oppress, right? And so that's both empower ourselves or ourselves feel oppressed as teachers and to either empower or oppress our students. And so I just really try to be careful when I'm talking about data that I'm always thinking of the positive. So even if there's a question on my assessment, I thought I taught it really well, not one single child got it right, like what can I learn from that? And what can the students learn from that empowers us to move forward? It can be really easy, especially in summer school. We have such a short time. You start to get some red bars on your OSAT to start really thinking negatively about yourself and about the students, and we want to always be able to use that data to push us forward. So that's my soapbox about that. So let's take a look at how we are going to use this data this summer. First part of the session, we're going to analyze our diagnostic. Second part, we're going to be looking at how can we adjust instruction based on this information. So a couple things before we start. We gave a diagnostic assessment. That's what you have with you. This is assessment that you give before you teach anything, figure out what kids know and don't know so you can move forward. Throughout the summer, you will also be giving formative assessments. That is really hard to read. Basically what that says is formative assessments are ongoing. They're daily assessments, so these might look like your lesson assessment, exit ticket type situation. It can also look like notes that you take about what students do during the lesson. So they're moving around the base 10 blocks, and this student really quickly moved the blocks into groups of 10s and 1s, and this student took a really long time. Those types of things are formative assessment data as well. And then finally, you'll be looking at summative assessment, which is how you measure that growth or mastery at the end, in this case the end of the summer, when you get into your region at the end of a larger unit of study. We're done teaching this for now, here's how kids are doing, and then of course there's that cycle again after that. So any questions about the difference between these three types of assessment? And again, if you have them, please just shout them out whenever we're going to be all in this together. So we're going to think now about kind of what can we learn from our diagnostic data. And there's a handout. If you prefer to look at it electronically, it's at the top of handout 1. If you prefer to look at it on paper so you can mark it up and stuff, I'll just pass these around. It's the same thing, it's just on paper. So we're going to kind of look at this fake data for a couple minutes, and we're going to look for a couple things. So the first thing we're going to look for is just trends, right? What do we see when we look at the data as a whole? So both whole class, small groups of students, and individual students. What do we see happening for these students based on the data? And in this case, it's a little bit inauthentic because we don't know anything about the imaginary students that are here. You can just pop those on the floor and I'll pick them up later. Then we're also going to look at content considerations. So do we notice things like objectives that seem to be foundational? Kids know those, but they don't know the harder part of the skill. Do they not know the foundational objective? Like they don't know how to multiply, so they're having trouble dividing. We can get some of that from the data as well. And also, are there common wrong answers? That's something else we can get from the data. Everybody is wrong in the same way. How can we use that to help us? Or everyone's right? So, we are going to take a look right now at this fake data. And we are going to think about overall trends, just that first step, step 1. So just take a look at it and see what you notice about overall trends for this class. We'll take about 3 to 4 minutes to look at it. The list of what the objectives are is on the back, because they're just labeled with numbers on the front. So if you're kind of looking for what types of skills are they having trouble with, that's there on the back. So we'll take about 4 minutes to look at that. You can do it collaboratively or on your own, whatever you prefer, and then we'll talk about it.